The people who leave you when you are at your lowest often believe they are walking away from your future, not just your present. 3 days after I buried my father, I learned how true that was. His funeral had been held on a gray Thursday afternoon outside Fort Worth, Texas. The sky stayed overcast the entire day, as if the weather itself understood that something permanent had ended. My father had spent 78 years on this earth. He was not a wealthy man, at least not from what I knew. He drove old trucks, fixed things instead of replacing them, and believed a handshake still meant something. For the last 4 years of his life, illness slowly took pieces of him away. I spent countless hours driving him to appointments, sitting beside hospital beds, and helping him through days that became harder with every passing month. I never regretted a minute of it. If anything, I wished I had more time. After the funeral, family members returned to their lives. Friends stopped calling as often. The casseroles disappeared. The sympathy cards stopped arriving. Grief has a strange way of emptying a house. Every room felt larger without my father in it. Every silence seemed louder. On Saturday evening, I found myself sitting alone in the kitchen staring at a cup of coffee that had gone cold nearly an hour earlier. Funeral flowers still sat on the dining table. Sympathy cards remained stacked beside them. The house smelled faintly of lilies and rain. That was when Olivia walked into the room. My wife of 12 years stood across from me, holding a manila envelope. Her expression looked calm. Too calm. The kind of calm people wear when they have already made a decision and spent weeks preparing for it. I remember noticing how carefully she placed the envelope on the table. No hesitation. No emotion. Just certainty. Then she sat down. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Rain tapped softly against the kitchen window. The refrigerator hummed in the background. Ordinary sounds. Ordinary moments. The kind you never realize you will remember forever. Finally, Olivia pushed the envelope toward me. I looked down and saw the logo of a law office printed in the corner. My stomach tightened immediately. Somewhere deep inside, I already knew. "Nathan," she said quietly, "I think we both know this is not working anymore." The words landed harder than I expected. Not because they were surprising. Looking back, the distance between us had been growing for years. I was simply too busy taking care of my father to fully acknowledge it. I stared at the envelope without opening it. Then another voice came from the hallway. "Maybe you should hear her out." I looked up. Ryan Brooks stepped into the kitchen. My best friend. 23 years of friendship. Fishing trips. Football games. Cookouts. Birthdays. Holidays. He had been standing there long enough to hear everything. The sight of him beside Olivia explained more than either of them needed to say. Neither denied it. Neither apologized. They simply stood there together while the truth settled over the room. Oddly enough, I did not yell. I did not argue. I did not beg. I was too tired for any of that. Grief had already drained me. Olivia explained that she wanted a different life, a different future. Ryan remained mostly silent, occasionally nodding as if confirming decisions that had already been made. The conversation lasted less than 20 minutes. 12 years reduced to 20 minutes. When they finally left, the house became silent again. I sat alone in the kitchen long after their taillights disappeared down the street. That was when I noticed something resting beside the sympathy cards. A sealed envelope addressed in my father's handwriting. I froze. I had never seen it before. Across the front were 6 words that immediately sent a chill through me. "Open only when you are alone." For several minutes, I simply stared at the envelope. The rain continued tapping against the window while the clock above the stove ticked through the silence. My father's handwriting covered the front in neat, familiar letters. "Open only when you are alone." The words felt less like an instruction and more like a prediction. Because for the first time in a very long time, I truly was alone. My father was gone. Olivia had walked out. Ryan had walked out with her. The house that once felt crowded with responsibility suddenly felt empty enough to echo. I picked up the envelope carefully and turned it over in my hands. The paper looked older than the sympathy cards surrounding it. Whatever was inside had been waiting for a while. I carried it upstairs to the spare bedroom that had belonged to my father during the final year of his life. The room still looked exactly the way he left it. His reading glasses rested on the nightstand. A worn paperback novel sat beside the lamp. A folded flannel shirt hung over the back of a chair. For a moment, I could almost believe he was downstairs making coffee. Grief plays tricks like that. It lets you borrow denial for a few seconds before reality returns. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked around. So many memories lived inside that room. Some difficult, some surprisingly good. My father never complained much. Even when treatments became exhausting, he still found reasons to smile. He used to tell me that a man's character is easiest to measure during hard seasons. At the time, I thought he was talking about illness. Looking back now, I think he was talking about something much bigger. I finally opened the envelope. Inside was a single folded letter. Nothing else. No legal documents. No photographs. No instructions. Just one handwritten page. I unfolded it slowly. The first sentence immediately caught my attention. Nathan, if you are reading this, then life has probably taken more from you than you thought you could bear. I stopped reading and stared at the paper. A chill ran through me. Somehow my father had known. Not the exact details perhaps, but he knew there would come a day when everything felt like it was falling apart. I continued. The letter spoke about patience, resilience, and truth. It sounded like him. Calm, practical, honest. Then the message changed direction. There are things about our family that I never told you. Not because I wanted to hide them forever, but because timing matters. Some truths help a person. Others can ruin them if they arrive too early. I frowned. My father had never been a mysterious man. He fixed engines, paid bills, and lived quietly. Secrets did not fit the image I carried of him. Yet there they were on the page. My eyes moved faster. He wrote about family history, about decisions made decades before I was born, about responsibilities that had been protected and preserved across generations. The details remained vague, almost frustratingly vague. Every answer seemed to create two new questions. Then I reached a sentence that made me sit up straighter. Within the next few days, someone will contact you from New York. When they do, listen carefully and say yes to the meeting. I read the line again. New York. I had never discussed New York with my father. He had barely traveled outside Texas during the last 20 years of his life. None of this made sense. The final paragraph was short. Short enough that I knew every word would matter. Trust your instincts. Do not let bitterness guide your decisions. And remember something important. The people who truly belong in your life will stay even when they believe you have nothing left to offer. I lowered the letter slowly. The room felt quieter than before. Outside, the rain had finally stopped. Moonlight slipped through the window and stretched across the floorboards. Downstairs, the empty house waited in silence. Olivia's absence still hurt. Ryan's betrayal still hurt. Losing my father hurt most of all. But beneath all that pain, something new had appeared. Curiosity, hope, maybe even purpose. Because somewhere beyond that room, beyond Texas, beyond everything I thought I understood about my life, a secret was waiting. And according to my father, it was already on its way to find me. The call came 4 days later. I was standing inside my auto repair shop just outside Fort Worth, staring at the engine of a customer's pickup truck when my phone lit up with a number I did not recognize. Normally, I let unknown calls go to voicemail. That morning, something told me not to. I wiped my hands on a shop towel and answered. The voice on the other end belonged to a man who introduced himself as Charles Whitmore. His tone was calm, professional, and unusually direct. He asked if I was Nathan Walker. When I confirmed, there was a brief pause before he continued. Mr. Walker, I am calling regarding matters connected to your late father's estate. My grip tightened slightly around the phone. For a moment, I thought about the letter sitting inside my desk drawer at home. Every word of it suddenly felt much heavier. Charles explained that he worked for a law firm in Manhattan and that certain matters could not be discussed over the phone. He requested a meeting in New York as soon as possible. I leaned against a workbench and looked across the garage floor. Mechanics moved between vehicles. Air compressors hummed. Radios played somewhere in the background. Everything around me felt ordinary. Yet somehow my life was beginning to feel anything but ordinary. Before ending the call, Charles said something that stayed with me the rest of the day. Your father was very specific about the timing of this conversation. After we hung up, I stood there staring at the concrete floor. My father had known this call was coming. Not hoped, not guessed, known. That realization unsettled me more than anything else. During lunch, I found myself replaying memories I had not thought about in years. Small moments, strange comments, conversations that once seemed meaningless. My father occasionally spoke about patience in a way that sounded almost personal, as though he was protecting information he could not yet share. At the time, I assumed it was simply age and wisdom talking. Now I was no longer sure. That evening, I returned to the empty house. Olivia's side of the closet was nearly cleared out. Several framed photographs had disappeared. The silence felt different than before. Less painful, more reflective. The initial shock of losing everything had begun transforming into something else. Questions. I sat at the kitchen table and reread my father's letter. This time I noticed details I had overlooked before. The references to family history. The emphasis on timing. The repeated instructions to trust my instincts. Every sentence seemed connected to the phone call from New York. By midnight I had made my decision. 2 days later, I boarded a flight heading east. I had not been to New York in nearly 2 decades. The city appeared beneath the clouds like another world entirely. Steel, glass, and endless movement stretched in every direction. Everything seemed larger, faster, and louder than Texas. The next morning, a black sedan collected me from the hotel and drove me through Midtown Manhattan. We stopped outside a towering office building overlooking the city skyline. The lobby alone looked more expensive than anything I had ever walked through. Marble floors reflected the morning sunlight. People in tailored suits crossed the room, carrying briefcases and coffee cups. For a second, I felt completely out of place. Then I remembered something my father once told me. Confidence is not believing you belong everywhere. It is being comfortable enough to stand where you are. A receptionist escorted me upstairs. Moments later, I found myself sitting inside a conference room surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows. The skyline stretched beyond the glass like something from a movie. A stack of folders rested neatly on the polished table. Charles Whitmore entered carrying another file. He shook my hand and sat down across from me. His expression was serious but not unfriendly. Then he opened the first folder and looked directly at me. "Mr. Walker," he said calmly, "before we discuss the future, there are several things you need to know about your family's past." At that moment, I realized the letter had only been the beginning. Nothing prepares you for the moment you discover that the story you believed about your family is only a fraction of the truth. I sat across from Charles Whitmore as morning sunlight poured through the glass walls of the conference room. Manhattan stretched endlessly behind him. The city looked powerful, confident, and completely indifferent to the fact that my entire understanding of my life was about to change. Charles opened the first folder and slid several documents toward me. Most of them contained names I did not recognize, dates that stretched back decades, business entities, property holdings, investment records. The deeper he went, the more confused I became. Finally, I interrupted him. "I think you have the wrong family." Charles smiled slightly. It was the kind of smile someone gives when they have heard the same reaction many times before. "I assure you, Mr. Walker, we do not." He folded his hands and began explaining. "My grandfather had built a series of successful business partnerships long before I was born. Oil leases, commercial real estate, private investments. Over time, those assets had grown substantially. Rather than placing everything directly into family ownership, he had structured a trust designed to preserve wealth across generations. My father had inherited responsibility for overseeing part of that structure. The information sounded impossible. That sounded exactly like him." The attorney continued. "The trust had remained largely hidden from public view. Professional managers handled operations. Independent firms oversaw investments. Several legal safeguards protected the assets from unnecessary attention. For decades, the system functioned quietly in the background while family members lived ordinary lives. My father had deliberately chosen not to reveal everything to me while he was alive. According to letters and instructions left behind, he wanted me to establish my own character before learning about the family's financial position. The more I listened, the more I understood. My father never wanted wealth to become a shortcut. He wanted me to become the kind of man who could stand on his own feet first. A strange mixture of pride and sadness settled over me. Pride because I finally understood his reasoning. Sadness because I could not ask him about any of it now. The conversation continued for more than 2 hours. Charles introduced me to financial advisors, trust administrators, and legal specialists. Every person in that room seemed familiar with my family history except me. Eventually, we reached the final folder. It was noticeably thicker than the others. Charles placed it directly in front of me. The room suddenly felt very quiet. Even the sounds of the city seemed distant. "Everything we have discussed today leads to this document," he said. My pulse quickened slightly. I opened the folder. Inside were detailed summaries of assets, valuations, and ownership structures. Rows of numbers filled the pages. At first they meant very little. Then I reached the final summary sheet. I stared at the figure printed near the bottom. Once, twice, 3 times. Certain numbers are so large they stop feeling real. This was one of them. The estimated value of the trust and associated holdings exceeded $500 million. I leaned back in my chair and simply looked at the page. $500 million. A week earlier, I had been worried about legal fees from a divorce. I had been wondering whether the repair shop needed new equipment. I had been grieving my father and questioning my future. Now I was staring at a number capable of changing generations. Charles allowed the silence to linger. Finally he spoke. Your father left one additional instruction. I looked up. He handed me a sealed envelope. My father's handwriting covered the front. Seeing it again tightened my throat. Beneath my name was a short sentence. Read this before making any decisions. At that moment, I realized the inheritance was not the biggest secret my father had left behind. I waited until I was alone before opening the second envelope. The conference room had emptied. The advisors were gone. Charles had stepped out to handle another meeting. Beyond the glass walls, New York continued moving at its relentless pace. Thousands of people walked the streets below, without realizing that one man sitting 30 floors above them was trying to make sense of 2 completely different lives. I broke the seal carefully. Inside was another handwritten letter from my father. The paper looked older than the first one. The handwriting was slightly shakier. He had probably written it during one of the more difficult periods of his illness. The first line immediately caught my attention. Nathan, if you are reading this, then you now know the truth about our family. I continued reading slowly. My father explained that he had spent years debating whether to tell me everything. Part of him wanted complete honesty. Another part feared what sudden wealth might do to a person who had never struggled. He believed hardship teaches lessons that comfort cannot. Character, patience, discipline, and gratitude are easier to appreciate when life forces you to earn them. For the first time since arriving in New York, I smiled. That sounded exactly like him. Then I reached the section that mattered most. Nathan, there is something more important than the money. Much more important. The sentence stood alone in the middle of the page. I kept reading. Wealth does not reveal who you are. It reveals who everyone else is. People will admire you for reasons that have nothing to do with your character. They will praise decisions they would have criticized before. Some will suddenly remember your friendship. Others will claim they always believed in you. Pay attention. Their behavior will teach you everything you need to know. I lowered the letter briefly and stared out the window. Olivia flashed through my mind. Then Ryan. The timing felt almost cruel. Only a week earlier, they had both looked at me as though my future had already been decided. They saw a grieving son, a struggling garage owner, a man whose life appeared to be shrinking. Neither knew what was waiting around the corner. According to my father, that ignorance might become one of the greatest gifts he ever gave me. I finished reading the final page. The last paragraph was short. Do not rush. Do not seek revenge. Do not try to prove anything. Build a life you are proud of. Let time reveal the rest. By the time I folded the letter, something inside me had changed. Not dramatically, not all at once, but enough. The anger I carried toward Olivia felt smaller. The betrayal still hurt. Ryan's actions still hurt. Yet I suddenly realized I no longer needed either of them to understand my value. My father had spent years protecting a fortune. More importantly, he had spent years protecting me from it. When Charles returned, he found me standing beside the window overlooking Manhattan. How are you holding up? He asked. I considered the question carefully. 48 hours earlier, I would have answered very differently. I think I finally understand what my father was trying to do, I said. Charles nodded as though he had expected that answer. We spent the rest of the afternoon reviewing practical matters. Ownership structures, management responsibilities, investment oversight, future planning. The numbers remained enormous, but they no longer felt like the most important part of the story. By evening, I stepped outside onto a crowded Manhattan sidewalk. The city lights reflected against the glass towers above me. Cars moved through intersections. People hurried home from work. Everything felt alive. For the first time since my father's funeral, the future no longer looked empty. It looked uncertain, but uncertainty and hopelessness are not the same thing. As I walked through the city, my phone vibrated. A message from Olivia appeared on the screen. It was short. We need to finalize a few details regarding the divorce. I stared at the message for several seconds before slipping the phone back into my pocket. She believed she was closing the final chapter of our story. What she did not know was that an entirely different chapter had already begun. The divorce became official less than 3 months later. There was no dramatic courtroom scene, no emotional speeches, no last-minute changes of heart, just paperwork, signatures, and a quiet acknowledgement that one chapter of my life had ended. Looking back, I am grateful for that. Clean endings leave less room for confusion. After returning from New York, I made a decision that surprised almost everyone around me. I told no one about the inheritance. Not my coworkers, not distant relatives, not old friends. The fewer people who knew, the better. My father's warning stayed with me. Wealth reveals people. I was not interested in becoming an experiment. Instead, I focused on learning. During the day, I continued running my repair shop. At night, I studied investments, business acquisitions, real estate, financial management. The more I learned, the more I realized how little I knew. Money creates opportunities, but knowledge determines whether those opportunities survive. A year earlier, I would have viewed education as a way to improve my business. Now I viewed it as preparation for a responsibility I never expected to inherit. Months passed. The pain from losing my father gradually softened. The memories remained, but the sharp edges faded. Olivia occasionally appeared through legal correspondence, but our personal communication became almost non-existent. Ryan disappeared entirely. For a while, I wondered whether either of them ever thought about me. Eventually, I stopped wondering. Some questions stop mattering when your life starts moving forward. About 8 months after my trip to New York, I sold the repair shop. The decision was not easy. That place represented years of hard work. Every tool, every lift, every workbench carried memories. On my final day, I walked through the empty building long after everyone else had left. Sunlight filtered through the open service bays. The concrete floors reflected a lifetime of effort. I stood there quietly and thanked the place for carrying me through difficult years. Then I locked the doors for the last time and drove away. Soon afterward, I relocated to Dallas. Not because I wanted luxury. I wanted distance. Distance from old habits. Distance from expectations. Distance from a version of myself that no longer existed. The city offered opportunities, anonymity, and room to build something new. The first year was challenging. Despite the resources now available to me, I refused to rush. I invested conservatively. I listened more than I spoke. I surrounded myself with experienced professionals who cared more about results than appearances. Some opportunities succeeded. Others failed. Every lesson made me better. My father often said patience compounds just like money. He was right about that too. 1 year became 2. 2 became 3. Small investments grew into larger ones. Business partnerships expanded. Commercial properties generated steady returns. Companies I helped acquire improved under strong leadership. Success arrived gradually, which made it easier to trust. Fast success often disappears as quickly as it arrives. Sustainable success grows roots. By the 4th year, my life looked completely different from the one I left behind. Yet the biggest change was not financial. It was emotional. The anger was gone. The resentment was gone. I no longer replayed old conversations in my head. I no longer imagined different outcomes. For the first time in years, I felt genuinely free. Then something unexpected happened. One afternoon, I received an invitation to a charity gala hosted by several organizations connected to projects I supported. Normally, I avoided large social events. Public attention never interested me. But this invitation felt different. The event would bring together business leaders, philanthropists, and community partners from across Texas. Several people whose judgment I respected encouraged me to attend. After some hesitation, I agreed. A few weeks later, I stood in front of a mirror inside a luxury hotel in downtown Dallas adjusting my tie. The ballroom downstairs was already filling with guests. Through the window, the city skyline glowed beneath the evening sky. I remember looking at my reflection and barely recognizing the man staring back. Not because of money, not because of success, because somewhere along the journey, I had become stronger than the person who sat alone in that kitchen years earlier. What I did not know was that before the night ended, I would come face to face with 2 people from my past who believed they had already seen the final version of my story. There is a strange moment that happens when you finally stop looking backward. You spend years carrying old memories, old disappointments, and old questions. Then one day you realize they no longer control your thoughts. That was how I felt walking into the ballroom that evening. The hotel was one of the most elegant buildings in Dallas. Crystal chandeliers hung from high ceilings. Soft music drifted through the room. Hundreds of guests moved between tables covered in white linen and fresh flowers. Large windows overlooked the city skyline, which shimmered beneath the fading light of sunset. 5 years earlier, a place like this would have intimidated me. I would have felt out of place among executives, investors, and public figures. That feeling never arrived. Not because I believed I was better than anyone else. Because I no longer felt the need to compare myself to anyone. The evening began exactly as expected. Conversations about charitable projects. Discussions about business initiatives. Introductions to people I had worked with indirectly for years. Everything felt relaxed, comfortable, familiar. Then, halfway through the evening, something unexpected happened. I noticed her. Olivia stood near the opposite side of the ballroom, speaking with several guests. For a second, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me. The last time I had seen her in person was years earlier during the divorce process. Yet there she was. Time had changed both of us. She looked older, naturally, but not in a negative way. More experienced, more serious. The confident certainty I remembered from our final months together seemed less visible now. I considered turning away, not because I feared the encounter, simply because I had no desire to revisit old history. Then fate made the decision for me. Olivia looked across the room and saw me. Everything about her expression changed instantly. Confusion arrived first, then disbelief, then recognition. She froze. Even from a distance, I could see her trying to process what she was seeing. The moment lasted only a few seconds before someone beside me began asking a question about one of our business projects. The conversation continued. Yet I noticed Olivia glance in my direction several more times throughout the next 20 minutes. Eventually, she began walking toward me. I remained where I was. Calm. Curious. Nothing more. Nathan, she said when she finally reached me. Hearing my name in her voice after all those years felt strangely distant. Like hearing a song from childhood that you have not listened to in decades. Familiar, but no longer personal. I smiled politely. Hello, Olivia. For a brief moment, neither of us knew what to say. The silence was not uncomfortable. It was simply honest. We were two completely different people standing in the same room. Before the conversation could continue, another voice joined us. Nathan. I turned. Ryan Brooks stood a few feet away. The last image I had of him came from my kitchen years earlier. He looked different now, not physically as much as emotionally. The confidence he once carried seemed diminished. There was uncertainty in his eyes, a hesitation that never existed before. We shook hands. The gesture felt polite rather than personal. Nearby guests continued moving through the ballroom, while old history quietly gathered around us. Then something happened that neither Olivia nor Ryan expected. Several people approached to greet me. One was the chief executive of a company we had recently partnered with. Another was a board member from a charitable foundation. A third congratulated me on a successful acquisition completed earlier that year. Every introduction revealed another piece of a life neither Olivia nor Ryan knew existed. I watched their reactions carefully. Not with satisfaction. Not with resentment. Simply observation. The same lesson my father warned me about years earlier was unfolding in real time. People form opinions using incomplete information. Sometimes entire futures are judged based on a single chapter. Eventually, the evening moved on. Guests returned to their conversations. Speeches began. The charity auction started. Yet throughout the remainder of the event, I continued noticing Olivia and Ryan watching from across the room. Questions had replaced certainty. Curiosity had replaced confidence. By the end of the night, I understood something important. They believed they had come face to face with a man they no longer recognized. The truth was much simpler. For the first time, they were finally seeing who I had always been. 3 days after the gala, my phone rang while I was reviewing reports in my office. The name on the screen surprised me. Olivia. For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail. Not because I was angry. The anger had disappeared years ago. I simply was not sure what remained to be said. Eventually, I answered. Her voice sounded different from the woman I remembered. Softer, more careful. She asked if we could meet for coffee. There was hesitation in every sentence. After a brief pause, I agreed. 2 afternoons later, we sat across from each other at a quiet cafe overlooking a small lake north of Dallas. The weather was pleasant. Sunlight reflected across the water. People walked along nearby trails. Everything around us felt peaceful. The contrast with our history was impossible to ignore. For several minutes, the conversation stayed polite. We talked about work, life, mutual acquaintances, the safe topics people choose when they are trying to find solid ground. Eventually, Olivia placed her coffee cup down and looked directly at me. I have been trying to understand what happened, she said. Not between us. I understand that part. I mean everything after. I remained silent. She continued. The gala had raised questions she could not answer. People knew my name. Business leaders treated me with respect. The call from New York. The trust. The family history. The years spent learning, building, and growing. As the story unfolded, her expression changed. Curiosity became surprise. Surprise became disbelief. Then I mentioned the inheritance. $500 million. For several seconds, she said nothing at all. The sounds of the cafe continued around us. Cups clinked softly. Conversations drifted through the air. Yet our table felt isolated from the rest of the world. Finally, she leaned back in her chair and stared out toward the lake. You were telling me that existed before the divorce? She asked quietly. I nodded. I did not know about it then. But yes. She closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them again, I could see the realization settling in. Every assumption she made years earlier was being forced through a completely different lens. The future she thought she was leaving behind had never been the future at all. What struck me most was not her reaction to the money. It was her reaction to the timing. The knowledge that everything she believed about my potential had been incomplete. Eventually, she spoke again. I made the biggest mistake of my life. There was no defensiveness in her voice. No attempt to justify the past. Just honesty. I appreciated that. A week later, another unexpected conversation took place. Ryan contacted me. We met in a small restaurant outside the city. The confident man I remembered from years ago seemed diminished. Life had clearly challenged him. During our conversation, he admitted several business ventures had failed. Plans had not worked out the way he expected. Opportunities disappeared. Financial pressure followed. Listening to him, I felt something surprising. Not satisfaction. Compassion. We were all older now. We all carried lessons. At one point, Ryan shook his head and laughed softly. You know what is funny? He asked. Back then, I thought I understood who was going to succeed. Neither of us spoke for a moment. The answer hung between us. People often mistake circumstances for character. They assume present conditions predict future outcomes. My father understood better. Character is revealed over time. Patience reveals it. Difficulty reveals it. Success reveals it. As I drove home beneath a Texas sunset glowing orange across the horizon, I thought about both conversations. Olivia finally knew the truth. Ryan finally understood the mistake. Yet the most important realization belonged to me. The inheritance changed my circumstances. The betrayal changed my perspective. But neither event defined my life. The choices I made afterward did that. Nearly 6 years had passed since the night my father died and my old life came apart. Looking back, it is tempting to focus on the inheritance because it was the most dramatic part of the story. $500 million is a number that captures attention. It changes headlines. It changes assumptions. It changes the way strangers see you. But if I am being honest, the money was never the most valuable thing I received. The most valuable thing was clarity. My father gave me that. He gave me the chance to discover who people really were before success entered the picture. On a quiet Saturday evening, I found myself sitting on the back porch of my home outside Dallas. The sun was beginning to sink below the horizon. Long shadows stretched across the fields. A gentle breeze moved through the grass. Beside me sat a cup of coffee and a small wooden box containing the letters my father left behind. Every few months, I still reread them. Not because I needed answers anymore, because they reminded me of lessons worth keeping. I opened the final letter and smiled as I reached the sentence that had guided so many of my decisions. The people who truly belong in your life will stay even when they believe you have nothing left to offer. For years, I thought those words were about loyalty. Eventually, I realized they were also about self-respect. When you stop chasing approval, stop trying to prove your worth, and stop measuring yourself through other people's opinions, life becomes surprisingly peaceful. Olivia eventually moved on with her life. So did Ryan. I genuinely wish them both well. Some people expect stories like this to end with revenge. Mine did not. The truth is that life already teaches enough lessons on its own. Time has a way of revealing consequences without our help. As for me, I continued building businesses, supporting charitable projects, and creating opportunities for others. Yet the accomplishment that means the most has nothing to do with money or success. It is the fact that I survived the hardest season of my life without allowing it to turn me bitter. I lost my father. I lost my marriage. I lost my closest friend. But I did not lose myself. And in the end, that made all the difference. Sometimes people ask whether I would change anything if I could go back. The answer surprises them. No, I would not. The pain was real. The disappointment was real. The loneliness was real. But every difficult moment pushed me toward the person I eventually became. If my father had told me the truth years earlier, perhaps I would have made different choices. If Olivia had stayed, perhaps I never would have discovered how strong I could become. If Ryan had remained loyal, perhaps I would never have learned the value of standing on my own. Life rarely unfolds the way we plan. Sometimes what feels like a setback is actually a redirection. Sometimes what feels like an ending is the beginning of something better. As darkness slowly settled across the Texas sky, I folded my father's letter and placed it back inside the box. The journey was complete. The questions were gone. The anger was gone. Only gratitude remained. Gratitude for the lessons. Gratitude for the growth. Gratitude for the truth. And now I would love to know what you think. If you were in my position, what lesson would have stayed with you the most? Would it be the importance of loyalty, the danger of judging people too quickly, or the value of staying patient when life seems unfair? Share your thoughts because every perspective tells its own story. And if stories about resilience, second chances, personal growth, and unexpected turns in life resonate with you, I hope you will consider joining us again. There are many more journeys ahead, and sometimes the next story arrives with a lesson we did not even know we needed.